all right, what we're going to be talking about here is the 1952 UFO saucer flap. Sounds good?
Sorry, I was trying to pull everything up. Hey, Frank.
Hi, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Hanging in there.
Good.
Getting ready here. Got my notes all over the place.
Excellent. Yeah, I guess you're used to some 3-4 hour ones, and we're not. We don't have to go that far.
are you basically going to lead me into this, or
Sure.
do you just want me to take off and fly with it?
Yeah, I'll lead you into it. Can you give me real quick, because I've got a bunch of notes and I just want to hear it right from you, and I'm going to write it down later. No, I've got that. No, get it.
Basically, we're going to be talking about 1952. We can give a little bit of what was going on because it had the most sightings in Project Blue Book history.
Yeah.
We had the Washington, D.C. flyovers that started the summer of the saucers of the flap, and Flatwoods ended it.
Yeah.
So basically, 52, Washington, D.C. had, and then that whole summer had the highest amount of sightings in history, and Flatwoods ended the summer, and that was kind of the peak of
Great
UFO sightings.
My biggest thing is, how do I say your last name?
Feschino.
Feschino.
Like Feschino, it's Feschino.
Feschino, right?
Yep.
Feschino.
That's it.
Okay, great. Okay.
Got it.
All right, that was that's like the most important thing. They might as well call it the Feschino monster now. You're like the man for this, so.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's what the little kids on the tour called me, the Monster Man.
Oh, all right. That's what you've become.
That happened in Walmart when I was in West Virginia a couple of years ago. All the kids are screaming across Walmart running because they had seen me on TV. And I was like very embarrassed, so I started walking around with a baseball hat and dark sunglasses on after that.
Oh, and you're pretty tall too, aren't you?
He's 6'5".
Oh my gosh!
Yeah,
so
I stick out. So.
That's definitely that. Oh well, you're like you sound like you wouldn't hurt a flea. Okay, are you about ready?
Yep.
Okay. Hey there, I'm Connie Willis. We are back with High Strangeness. Hey there, this is Connie Willis back with High Strangeness. The number to call is 1-800-STRANGE, 1-800-STRANGE, and also the website is highstrangeness.com. Be sure and check that out as we go through the show, because we start adding pictures along the way with what we're given by our guests. We don't want you to cheat and look ahead, so we like to do it that way. So our guest today, Frank Feschino, author and also the main man, as far as I know. I don't think anybody's above you with this, and the Flatwood Monster. How are you?
Good. Glad to be here, Connie.
Yeah, nice to hear from you. I got to tell you, I'm actually confused, and I just want to get right into this. I'm confused because I knew a little bit about the Flatwoods Monster. You and Stan Friedman was really great about talking about that too. But so I watched Monster Quest, and now I'm totally lost. It's all over the place. Apparently, what they're showing me is not the facts, and I'm looking for the facts.
What happened with the Monster Quest show is it was not edited like I would have liked it to be. To be very nice. They took great liberties with the story. When it was edited and cut together, it was very misleading and vague, and the storyline of the events that happened on September 12, 1952 were very confusing. And after working on the story for 20 years, I was a stickler for timelines, because I basically know what happened within a few minutes on September 12, 52. I spent enough of years putting this story together, and when it got outside of my circle and into the hands of somebody else, it was completely botched up. What happened on September 12, 1952 is what was said to have been a monster, the Flatwoods Monster, was actually a metallic structure. It was like a miniature probe craft. And what happened back in 1952 after this incident occurred, two of the primary witnesses went on a national television show called We the People, and a sketch artist sat down with them. He sat down with the primary witness, Kathleen May, and another adult witness, Gene Lemon, and Ailey Stewart Jr., who was the reporter, the Johnny on the spot, who broke the story to the media. What happened is when the sketch artist sat down before this talk show and asked the witnesses what this entity looked like, he actually drew the picture incorrectly. And for nearly 60 years, what has been seen is this hooded monster with bulging eyes, with an ace of spades covering over its head with a cloth garment, with these, it's like a cloaked, flared-out dress, and this thing was said to have been hovering. Well, that was the incorrect drawing, and for all of these years, people have been looking at this and say, well, it's a good, solid story because it was multiple witnesses, but it's kind of a ridiculous-looking creature. This monster was drawn and portrayed as having scary arms and claws.
Yeah, if I remember, it looked kind of like a witch to me.
Right, right. Well, what it actually was, Connie, I'm an illustrator myself, a graduate of Pear College of Art, and I sat down with the witnesses over the years that I worked with them, primarily Kathleen May, who saw this, we're going to call it a so-called monster, for lack of better words. It was actually a small probe, like a metallic craft, and it hovered. I worked with Kathleen, Freddie May. I had spoke to several of the different witnesses, but I primarily worked with the May family. Kathleen May saw this Flatwoods monster the length of a car. She told me, quote, a small car. So she was about 10, 12 feet away from it. Her son, Freddie, saw it from about 30 feet away from a gate along the path. So what was great working with the witnesses, Connie, is I was able to work with a witness who was very extremely up close and personal, right up on top of this thing. And Freddie May was back, so he saw the whole scene unfold. And on my website, you can see the different illustrations of what this thing actually looked like. What was portrayed as having an ace of spades covering like a garment over the top of its head was actually, I was told, was to be a helmet, like an apparatus similar to a cowl. This cowl had a flat plate glass window, like a barrier in front of it, and it had an inner helmet. The inner helmet didn't have eyes. It actually had portholes. That was what the illustrator and people had misrepresented over the years. So what you actually have is something that's similar to a spacesuit. The whole body from the shoulders down flared out. When it got towards the midsection, there was a set of pipes that ran around the lower circumference of the body, which were similar to a booster rocket. And this is where the propulsion system had emitted this gas, which was like a sulfur-type gas that hovered throughout the area and made the witnesses sick. And this, if you look at the illustration, was portrayed correctly because there's a drop-cast shadow in the original illustration, but everybody thought it was ridiculous. A monster 12 foot tall wearing a dress with arms and claws with bulging eyes, and it hovered. That was actually correct. It did hover. The witnesses told me it was like a hovering craft that was about a foot to a foot and a half off the ground.
And I just want to tell the listeners right now, they can go ahead and go to highstrangeness.com, and they can start seeing the pictures. And they can also go to your website at flatwoodsmonster.com as well and follow along.
So what we have here is when the Monster Quest, the original production team worked with me. They worked with me, Stanton Friedman, Alfred Lenberg, John Bainbridge, Freddie May, and Mr. John Barker, who was one of the original reporters who worked for a radio station out of Charleston. He's one of the, as far as I know, the oldest living reporter to have been interviewed. So we had this great group of people to work on this particular episode. We spent a week with the team. I was in the hot seat and actually videotaped for 6.5 hours when this whole thing was put together and it was drafted, the timeline, the whole structure of the story was put together, it was in decent shape. When it got out of the original production crew's hands and it went up to the top, the hierarchy all the way through, it just got butchered and cut to pieces. And the Monster Quest episode, you see Mrs. May with the kids going up the hill to investigate what they thought was a downed meteor that had landed on the Bailey Fisher farm.
Right.
When they came up to the encounter point to where the tree was, it was a white oak tree that was about a little over 100 foot tall off to the left of the path. When they neared this area, they flashed their flashlights up towards this tree. They had seen something about 12 foot in the air that resembled eyes, glowing eyes. And this is when the Flatwoods monster actually lifted off the ground. It was spraying oil and it hovered in front of the nearest witnesses. Well, the Flatwoods monster mechanical structure was never shown in the Monster Quest episode. And it was very vague and misleading because what happened the following night, according to my research and piecing my timelines together, there was another incident that happened approximately 17 miles away in a town called Frametown. And that is what was seen on the Monster Quest episode. It was George and Edith Snatowski and their baby had actually encountered this 9-foot-tall creature. That was what the reenactment was. What wasn't made too clear was the bridge and the connection between Flatwoods and Frametown. What was seen in Frametown was the reptilian creature that was in the spacesuit. It was actually the Flatwoods monster with the upper portion of its spacesuit off and gone, and it was hovering. You had the sulfur smell, the same shaped craft, the same colors, the whole ball of wax. Everything was the same in both cases, except the upper portion of the suit was off, which was basically the upper portion of the torso section, which had flared down from the shoulders to the waist, the inner helmet, which was red with the porthole openings, and the cowl with the barrier in front. All of that was gone. So the Flatwoods monster was actually unveiled. It was seen the following night. The bridge between the two incidents was not made clear.
Yeah, exactly. So you are saying that, okay, the first time it was seen by the May family, it had the top on it.
Right, the upper portion of the suit was on it.
And the second night, it was seen in Frametown?
Right, 17 miles away.
Okay, and it was a reptilian. Was it reptilian? I know the top half was off, but was it actually reptilian, or was that the Monster Quest?
No, it was a reptilian.
Oh, okay. So
and the portrayal of it was pretty close. Not exactly, but
really?
It was close. My illustrations were actually shown within the show itself, my black and white drawings, and I actually talked to George Snatowski, who encountered this creature. I have the original magazine article that gives the explicit blow-by-blow detail of what happened, which he told me was correct. So I had a lot to work with.
Yeah.
The Flatwoods part, it was very disappointing because it was kind of breezed over, and they just brought the viewer straight into the Frametown incident, and the Flatwoods was left in the dust behind, and that is the correlation, is these two were actually the same creature that were stranded in West Virginia. The craft had actually taken off, and I had plotted this craft. Once it took off, I spoke to witnesses, past investigators' research. I had newspaper articles, the weeklies that spoke about the flight path once it left Flatwoods, and it actually landed on James Knob, or James Knoll, in Frametown, and that's where the incident took place about 24 hours later.
Okay, so were those really the only two sightings of the creature? Or whatever
yes,
that was?
in Flatwoods and Frametown, West Virginia, those were the only two in that area.
Okay.
Those were the May family and the kids that saw it there, and then the Snatowski incident the following night.
Okay.
And after it encountered the Snatowski family, this creature went back into the woods and then across craft, another craft took off.
Oh, okay. Did anybody feel scared? Was there any fear? Did they feel like this thing was coming after them at all?
In which incident?
Either one.
Both of them, they were absolutely terrified.
Oh.
Absolutely terrified out of their minds.
Well, let's talk about the first incident first, because I was so confused, Frank, from watching the show. I had no idea what the story was anymore, so thank you for clarifying that for us. But so let's go into the real truth and nuts and bolts here. The very first incident with the May family.
Right. So let me go back a couple steps, Connie, and tell you what I did. Not too many people had really looked outside of Flatwoods. One of the original investigators did. He was Ivan Sanderson, and another one was Gray Barker. And to make a long story short, there were UFOs that were flying all over Braxton County, and the hub was actually Flatwoods.
Oh.
Okay? Nobody could figure out for years. It was driving these investigators crazy why different shaped craft were seen flying over the area. There was the big oval-shaped craft, which were seen quite often in the 1950s. You have the cigar-shaped objects, which look like the fuselage of a jet without wings. They were seen over that area. And there were big, gigantic, round UFOs that looked like big spheres. They were big balls. All of these craft were seen over the Flatwoods area and throughout Braxton County, and the original investigators couldn't figure out why, all these different craft. Was it just a misidentification? Were people describing them wrong, the way, and all this documentation? Well, these people did see several different craft, and everything ended up coming into the Flatwoods area. It was actually a rescue mission. And how I was able to determine this by working with military people and different walks of life over the past 20 years, I was able to establish 102 locations over the United States on that one particular day, and I plotted these 102 locations on different maps. Then I put all of these maps together and made what I call my master map, which is on my website. And we were able to connect the dots and figure out what was going on. The initial stage of this research took 12 years to put together, Connie. I worked with Project Blue Book documents, and that was a nightmare because I had to re-ink and go over several of these documents and papers because they were faded.
Yeah.
So 12 years later, I was able to establish the flight paths of these UFOs, and they were actually seen over 21 hours of sustained sightings over 9 East Coast states. Then there were sightings in California, Illinois. So we have 11 states where these UFOs were sighted. And I started working with Stanton Friedman, and he got his hands on some of the original newspaper articles from around the United States. And what I would do is take all these articles, these Project Blue Book documents, witnesses that had come forward and spoke to me, and I extracted all the information and the locations of the villages, the towns, the cities where these UFOs were seen. They were seen by thousands of people that night. And I plotted these points, and then having the different times, I was able to connect the dots. And the majority of these flight paths all led to central West Virginia, to where the Flatwoods craft landed. What is interesting is when I started backtracking and going outside of Braxton County and Flatwoods, I discovered the actual flight path trajectory of the Flatwoods monster craft. It came over the East Coast, flew over Washington, D.C., and it was called the Flame Over Washington by the New York Times.
Oh, I remember that, yes.
Okay, and it flew over Washington, and along its flight path, Connie, this thing was coming down to treetop level. This thing had pieces exploding off of it. There were flames coming off of it. It was flying erratically. It flew west over Washington, flew into Virginia. Then it proceeded to fly into West Virginia. When it hit northern Braxton County, it turned south, followed the main state route, the main road, flew between the mountains, and landed on the Fisher Farm. En route to landing on the farm, it was seen by a bunch of kids playing football. It was their Friday night pickup game. These kids had left the playground, went up to the bordering farm house, which was the May home. Two of the boys in the group were Freddie and Eddie. It was their mom, Kathleen, who led the group up onto the Bailey Fisher farm with Gene Lemon. There was a dog that had went up with them from the neighborhood. It was a collie dog. It led the group up there. So what we have here in the end is a bunch of witnesses who are going to look for what they thought was a downed meteor on the back part of the farm.
Right, and who wouldn't go checking that out when you see that? Of course they're going to go toward that.
Right. Well, some people actually chickened out and left. A lot of the kids went.
Even when they thought it was a meteorite?
Yeah, it was getting dark. There was a lot of younger
okay.
kids. They were supposed to have been home by dark, and it's getting dark. And there's a lot
and
of
the
kids.
woods are always scary at that point in that
yeah,
age, right?
especially walking into the woods. I've been up there at night and reenacted this whole sequence, and I don't think I would go up there with a bunch of little kids. I would have chickened out.
Oh, I'd go, meteorite, that's like hundreds of thousands of dollars. Let's go.
Yeah, right. And basically that's what they were going up there to look for.
Right.
And as they went up this path area, that's when this whole area, there was this gas permeating down the path, and that's when they became sick. And they were pushing on to go up towards the back of the where the mountain is. Now, this mountain didn't come to a peak, Connie. It was a flat plateau. It was a perfect spot for this thing to land. Where the confusion came in is within about a half an hour prior to the ship landing, the damaged ship, there was several other ships that flew into the area. There was actually 4 of them that flew over that particular area.
Ah.
They came in from different directions, and they were doing a grid reconnaissance like the military does, looking for a downed craft.
Oh, okay.
One went north, one went south, and one actually flew over the Fisher farm, and they were flying at very low levels. Another jet, a jet-like object that looked like a big cigar, had actually come in. So we have 4 UFOs doing reconnaissance and searching a grid area. And when the military people I work with were amazed when they saw the layout that I had actually done, they said they were looking for this thing. What happened, Connie, is they came in too early and they were doing their search for this downed craft. The Flatwoods monster craft was still on its way coming in.
Oh.
And they missed the rendezvous. And me and my team figured this out within a minute or 2.
Well, that shows that they knew about this.
Oh, of course. And that's what the past investigators, and it's well documented. Donald Kehoe of NICAP, he investigated this case and spoke about it. Harold T. Wilkins, Gray Barker, Ivan Sanderson, the list goes on, that we knew there were UFOs seen in that area. Nobody could figure out why.
Let me ask you why. Isn't that area, is it like coal mines or what's that area known for?
Well, it's basically farms.
Okay.
There's no coal mines in that immediate area, but
There's not like steep hills.
the reason we think that this thing went down in that particular area, Flatwoods is approximately 206 miles west of Washington, D.C. If you look at my master map, you'll see it.
Right.
It is directly west of the Capitol. When this damaged object flew over Washington, it flew straight into Braxton County, and when it headed south, it flew a few miles and landed on the farm. Where it landed is the geographical dead eye center of the state. And if you do an omni-circle around Flatwoods, there are no Air Force bases in that immediate vicinity. It landed right in the middle. It knew where to touch down, where it wouldn't be bothered.
Gotcha.
And what happened is when it finally landed, the other craft had left and moved away. And you could see this on my master map if you look at it. And I give a little explanation of what actually happened there. It was a search and rescue.
Right. Okay. And you can check that out as well at flatwoodsmonster.com. We also have a link for you if you go to highstrangeness.com that will take you right there. to what Frank is talking to you about. So the kids go up and they start smelling this gas.
Yeah, it's like a sulfur smell.
Okay.
And Kathleen May is leading the group up this path with the boys. And what had actually happened, Connie, in the meantime, where this craft had touched down in the back, it wasn't a meteor. There was no
That's for
sonic
sure.
boom. This thing was directing. It was, passing over at low altitude. And what we have here is a craft that touched in the back part of the property on a flat plateau, geographical center of the state, and it's sitting there and it was glowing. Another adult witness, Jack Davis, who I worked with, actually had seen this craft coming in from a different part of the town, which is great because now we have the testimony of another adult who had actually seen this thing coming down.
Mm-hmm.
And when this thing touched down, he said you could see it glowing through the trees. This thing was basically, you could see it sitting up on this plateau. By the time that Mrs. May and the kids got up there, this craft had actually relocated into a field down in back of some pear trees, which were part of an orchard. And this is an area where cattle and horses graze throughout the year. So this craft is now relocated, and it's sitting up in the corner of a gully, tucked away in the back part of the property. They didn't know it had relocated. They're looking straight ahead to walk up towards the back up this inclination. As they enter this gas area, the dog, which was this big collie, had darted ahead, and it took off, and it runs into the fog. It gets a little bit up ahead of them, and it starts barking, freaking out, going crazy. It yelps and turns around and hightails and goes back in the other direction.
Yeah, that's what I would be doing.
And the dead was found the following day. It was found dead.
Oh, no.
That was reported by Ivan Sanderson. So whatever happened, this dog got a whiff or got a good gulp of this sulfur, which was pretty sickening.
Oh.
So Kathleen May is walking up the path with Gene Lemon. They had just passed over a second gate. Neil Nunley, another witness, was right behind them, Ed May and Ronnie Shaver. And the back of the path, these people are all strewn out. They weren't huddled up. They were strewn out along the path. We had Freddie May, Teddy Neal, and Tommy Heyer. He was a young boy who joined the group afterwards. So we have these 8 witnesses. 2 are adults, and the rest are kids between 6 and 14 years old.
Okay.
This smell is rolling down in this fog form. Mrs. May is up and leading the path with Lemon, and they see these lights about 12 feet up in the air. They thought it was an animal perched up on a tree, a raccoon or a possum, because it's way the heck up there, 12 foot high. The tree is set 4 feet back off of this dirt path. And they put their flashlights on, and they set the beams and direct them up towards this set of eyes. And that's when they realized it wasn't something sitting up in a tree. They were actually eyes that were attached to a body that was 12 foot tall. This thing lifted off the ground and let out a blast of this smell of this fog, which I said earlier, that was part of the propulsion system. And it hovers down this 4 foot incline. It moves in front of the path in front of them. Gene Lemon fell over. He had actually screamed. He hit the ground. It's moving in front of Kathleen May, so she got a good look at it, length of a car. This thing was spewing and splattering oil out. It was making noises, Kathleen told me, that sounded like frying bacon, basically like hot grease. Something's being fried in a pan. And that whole area, she said, was warm. And this thing moves in front of her, and it's splattering oil out all over the place.
Actual oil?
Yeah, it was a little bit
oil.
thicker. It was similar to oil. Let's say oil-like.
Okay.
Okay, and that's what hit her and splattered down. It was on her face in the front of her uniform. Another witness that I worked with who was involved with the story was actually Colonel Dale Levitt. He was the National Guard commander who was up there in West Virginia for the following weeks for crowd control. There was estimated, Connie, this little small town tucked away in the Appalachian Mountains of 300 people. There was an estimated 10,000 people that went up there and trampled this town in like 4 or 5 weeks or so. The West Virginia National Guard was up there. Mm-hmm. Kathleen May put me in touch with Colonel Dale Levitt, and I spoke to Levitt up on location the first time during an interview. He would not allow me to tape him, videotape him, audio tape. I took notes. And what I discovered during our meeting at that point, Connie, is Levitt had actually received a call from the Air Force in Washington. The Pentagon called him. They brought together 180 troops. They went to an area a few miles down the road where there was said to have been an airplane crash. It wasn't an airplane crash, it was another damaged object that went down. Levitt set his troops up there, and a contingent of about 60 men went into Flatwoods. They were ordered to go there to see what happened, and Levitt told me he was up there for a little while, and he set the troops up. He told me the Air Force wanted to know what happened and what touched down up there. So basically, their mission, it was a covert mission. They came into the backside of the farm that night when everybody was sleeping. They cordoned off the area, and they took the oil samples. He told me he took tree samples, pieces of the leaves, this oil stuff he told me was puddled on the ground. There was trace evidence on the ground from where this craft had hovered back and forth.
Right.
Off the main craft, there was a lot of evidence there. He gathered it all up, and he told me he shifted it off to Washington. He sent it up to D.C., and what had happened is he told me his troops stayed there overnight to see if something else was going to happen. So the Air Force knew something went down there.
Right.
And they wanted this area cordoned off, checked out, grabbed the samples, and Levitt actually let me tape him on another meeting. And we went up to the farm, and I stood there with a camera for nearly an hour, pointed in his face, and he told me what happened. And that interview is in my book.
Mm.
So we do have military involvement.
Excellent.
And we do have a lot of documentation
right.
of what actually happened that night. And I also spoke and interviewed. It's the only interview I have, Connie, in existence. It's with the reporter, Ailey Stewart Jr., who went up there, and he was directed by a couple of the boys about an hour after this whole thing went down in Flatwoods. And he went up there with a posse. And it was a posse because he had a bunch of guys from town, including Kathleen May's father. They were up there with shotguns and handguns looking to see what scared the hell out of these kids and Mrs. May.
That's what I would have.
Yeah, and he told me that he was just up there for a little while. He spotlighted around, and he saw the trace evidence on the ground, and he knelt down because he was in the Air Force himself, so he was a vet.
Trained
he smelled
eye.
down, and he noticed the smell was still in the grass and the dirt on the top of the surface, because he knew gas has settled. And it settled pretty quick and went down. And he said that was noticeable, and he saw the evidence in the area. And he also went on to talk about what he found the next day. He found a piece of metal when he was back up on the spot when the sun came up.
Oh.
So, we have a lot of evidence that was confiscated. It was grabbed by the government, and it was picked up because these were the people that were going on the nationwide talk show, We the People.
Well, did you say that the reporter found a piece of metal?
Yes, he did.
And that was confiscated from him?
Yes, the day before he went on the national television.
How did they know he had it? Was he not being cool about it?
Yeah, he was kind of
there we
bragging
go.
about it and had told a lot of people.
Let me tell anybody out there, all our listeners out there, if you ever see anything like come out of the sky or something absolutely not of this world in front of you and some evidence is left behind, come to people like us, Frank, Stan Friedman, myself, blah, blah, blah. Let us know, because let us at least report it, look at it, and check it out ourselves before someone else takes it away and we never see it again. Okay, I feel better now. Okay. Do you agree, Frank?
Yes.
Okay. Do I have
Yeah.
your thumbs up on that?
He told me, Stewart told me his father was kind of nervous about this because he was telling people around town that he had it.
Well, what did it look like? What can you describe about it?
When I interviewed him, he held his hand up and he made a circle with his middle finger and his thumb. So, and he told me it was flat and it was bright silver and it looked like drip solder. And as it hit the ground, and it was in a very heated up form, so it was basically almost like a liquid. And when it hit the ground, it splattered and had like little arms coming off of it, like an octopus. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
Like if solder had hit the ground and it splatters out.
Right.
Well, he told me that he took that and he was in a local gas station in Flatwoods and he put it into a vice clamp and they put 2 gasoline blowtorches on it as hot as it would go and it wouldn't melt.
How did they even think of that?
Yeah, they wanted to see what would happen.
Oh, if it would have all melted or anything would have happened, I would have
Right,
choked
and he
them
said-
at that point.
Yeah, it wouldn't melt. You know,
Wow,
the interview with him is phenomenal.
Oh,
He did a really good interview, and that's all in the book too.
Excellent.
And he was a very big help, along with some of the old timers. Most of them are dead now, Connie. I've been
Right.
working on this story for 20 years now, and so I was able to grab videotape footage when I didn't have cameras available. I had tape recorders, so I always had some means of documenting this case.
Right.
And the majority of it is in that book.
So I got like a bazillion questions I'm dying to ask, but I also want you to get through the actual story of it so we can go from there. So, okay, the reporter goes out and sees all this and gets that little bit of evidence, but then it's gone. But it was exactly the next day that they see the lizard-looking reptilian guy?
Okay, that was what happened in Flatwoods was September 12th.
Okay.
Okay, the craft had taken off. Mrs. May told me that somebody actually saw it leaving.
Wow.
It was making almost like a pendulum motion, which is not uncommon. And it took off. It went into another area, touched down again. Then it went along the local river, went down the Elk River. When it landed on James Knob, okay, it was seen by some of the James boys. During the Monster Quest episode, that's the area where we actually were, up in the mountains that night.
Oh, okay.
Okay, that is the hot spot where things have been seen since the 50s.
Where I'm going to be with you one day.
Yeah, it's a fun area to check out.
I can't wait.
But you have to go there at the right time of year.
Right.
At certain times of year, I don't know, maybe the tourism is at its peak point, but
I'm
there's
not
certain
going with-
points of the year where they're seen up there more than others.
Well, I'm not going without you, and I know you'll know when to go. So.
Oh yeah, and then where and the whole thing, but that's a whole story in itself.
Excellent.
So what happened is the Flatwoods monster craft actually touched down and landed on James Knob, which is another high point in the area and even more secluded and isolated. And the following day, it was about 8 o'clock, and that's when this fellow was going back home, and he was going through the mountains. George Natowski and his wife, they were from Queens, New York, and they were going along this area into the Frametown area along the main road, and that's when his car stalled.
Oh.
The electrical system cut down, like an electromagnetic field. Something had actually affected the car, went completely dead, rolled to a stop.
The first sign to run.
Right.
Right.
And well, you're in the middle of the mountains here in a desolate, isolated area. This guy was very scared.
Mm-hmm.
When I spoke to him on the phone years ago before he died, he was almost paralyzed with fear. It was probably the most scared he was in his whole life.
I bet.
The windows were down a little bit, and the first thing he noticed was this terrible sulfur smell, just like what was the same thing in Flatwoods. Okay, and he thought a sulfur plant was burning in the area. That's how bad it was. The whole area started filling up with this sulfur smoke. He got out of his vehicle. His wife is starting to cough and gag. They had their baby, who was 18 months old. The baby was in a crib in the back seat. his wife pulls the baby into the front seat. They roll the windows up. George gets out. He's checking the car to see if the battery was dead. He's looking at the car. He's monkeying around with the engine. Nothing's wrong with it. He looked out in the distance, and he saw way out into a wooded area. He saw this sphere-shaped object. As he got closer towards it, he could see it was like an egg-shaped object, and it was purplish color, and it was white and glowing. The night before, Mrs. May told me that during an interview that she saw a purplish flare when she was starting out from her front porch to go up to the border of the farm. She saw these purplish flare flashing up as well. So we have crafts that are seen that are egg-shaped. They're standing on end. A purplish flare color was noted in both cases, in Stotowski and in the Mays incident. We have this terrible sulfur smell in both cases. So we have a lot of
similarities
tie-ins here,
sure.
similarities.
Yes.
So this fellow, Snotowski, starts walking towards the woods. He's off to the side of the road. He goes through this little clearing, and he's walking up towards the woods where he sees this thing out in the distance, and it's hovering on end. And that's when he started getting these low-voltage electrical shocks going through his body. The smell became worse. He actually vomited profusely. He was throwing his guts up. He was vomiting all over himself. He went down on the ground. He got a whiff of this stuff, and it was horrendous. And he stopped pushing forward because he's getting electrical shocks as well. So he's pretty much in a mess. He finally gathers himself up, and he turns around. He starts walking back to the car, and he's stumbling. He fell a couple times. His equilibrium is off. His wife is in the car screaming bloody murder. She is hysterical, going off her rocker. She's screaming like Fay Ray when she saw King Kong. She's screaming and pointing over her husband's shoulder. Something's behind you. Look out. And he turns around, and from off the edge of the road, it had come out of the woods. It's along the road coming towards him is this 9-foot-tall monster.
Holy cow.
And that's what is called the frame top monster.
Holy cow.
And basically, the lower half of it was the booster rocket section. It was one big solid piece, okay? What he saw was the bloated body and long, spindly, skinny arms that went to 2 forked fingers. This thing is coming towards him, and it's floating off the ground, just like in the Flatwoods case. So we have basically the same craft, except we're seeing the actual entity that's standing inside of it, and it was a reptilian.
And it's going right to him.
Yes, it was coming right up behind him. And there's some illustrations on my website, and I go into explicit details in the book about it. And this thing comes towards him. It's following him. He gets hysterical. He runs back to the car, and he says he basically was fumbling. He was a nervous wreck. He could just about open the car door. He was shaking like a leaf. He jumps inside. He takes his wife and the baby, and this is his instinct.
That's right. The baby's there, too.
The baby's there. The baby's going hysterical, crying. They're all being choked out, basically. Okay? He shoves them down onto the ground because this is a big 1950s car. Okay, so there's a big area on the ground underneath the dashboard. He lays down on top of them. He's protecting them. He reaches into the glove box, and he pulls out a big, gigantic knife. Okay? He does not look up. He was petrified, he told me. He was basically scared to look up to see where this thing was. It had actually come up to the car, circled around the car, and when it got towards, it circled around the right-hand side of the car, went around the trunk, went back up the other side, actually circled the car. In the meantime, this sulfur smell from the propulsion system is covering the whole area, and they're having trouble breathing. And he's gagging, wife's gagging, the baby's going hysterical. George just told his wife, keep the baby quiet because the baby's freaking out. And he told me, and this was documented, his heart was pounding like a sledgehammer. He's completely freaked out. He has no idea what's going to go on. And he finally looks up, sticks his head up from underneath the dashboard, and this 9-foot-tall reptilian is hovering over the front portion of the car.
Looking right at him?
It's looking straight down on him from the hood.
Oh,
That's when he almost lost it.
Oh, if it's a bear, okay, it's a bear. It's probably going to do this to me. But if you don't know what it is, you have no idea.
Right. So, and he just saw this thing from the length of a car, from the windshield to the hood ornament, and this thing is hovering there, and it's looking down on him. And the thing reached down with its right arm, and it had it was a long, skinny arm. It was not like a human arm. It was misjointed. And it reached down, and it touched the hood of the car, and it actually burnt right through down to the primer and metal of the car. So he is still in the car with his wife. They're going hysterical. And this thing actually leaves after it touched the hood of the car. It actually backed up away from the car. It turned, and it proceeded into the direction of the craft, the oval craft that was hovering in the woods. And so basically we have a close encounter case here where the Satowski family just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Oh, wow.
They intervened into the middle of this thing getting picked up. When it hovered back into the woods, George said it went back. He saw it go into the woods, along the edge of the woods. Then it disappeared into the woods. And a couple minutes later, he saw this thing start moving in a pendulum motion, like it was picking up momentum, swinging back and forth, and then it took off.
Unbelievable.
And then the car was able to start.
Unbelievable. And he tore out, I'm sure. I'm
yeah,
sure
and he went into Sutton, excuse me, which is actually the county seat, and there was a gas station and truck stop there, and he went in there, and they kind of gathered themselves up.
Frank, did when he said he looked into the eyes of this thing, did he describe the eyes and the face of this reptilian-looking thing?
What he basically said is it was like a reptile snake-looking thing. It didn't have big eyes, but it had a big head and a big bloated body, and the arms were very skinny, like from the shoulders to the elbow were disjointed. They were like shorter, and from the elbow to the fingers were a different length. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It wasn't like a human arm. It was basically opposite.
Okay.
And instead of having 4 digits and a thumb, it had 2 long fingers.
And do they have pictures of where it ate the paint down to the primer on the car?
No, it was noticed actually by somebody the following day.
Oh, okay.
And Snatowski didn't talk about this story for about 3 years.
Sure. You're going to get
finally,
laughed at.
he went public with it. And by that point, it just was in a magazine that was called Mail. It was basically like a barbershop reading magazine, and by the time the thing was published, the Flatwoods Monster story had got pushed aside. Nobody had really made any connection with the 2 incidents. Jacques Vallée actually wrote about this Snatowski Frametown incident, and it's been written about, in a few different locations, but not to any length. And there was nobody ever put the connecting pieces together.
We are talking with Frank Feschino Jr. right now on High Strangeness. I'm Connie Willis. I'd like to give the phone number out to you if you'd like to call in and ask him some questions. The number is 1-800-STRANGE, 1-800-STRANGE, talking about the Flatwoods Monster and clearing up exactly what the story was if you happen to see the Monster Quest episode. So give us a call. Also, head to the highstrangeness.com, our website. You'll see the link to Frank's website as well. You'll see all the pictures. You'll see what he's talking about, the master map that he has as well. We are back at High Strangeness. I'm Connie Willis with Frank Feschino Jr. of the Flatwoods Monster, the expert of it, the master man to answer every one of your questions. A couple other questions before we go, because we are running out of time, Frank, are, and it's just been incredible. Thank you for clearing up, what I had missing on the show. But one of the questions I have for you, you talk about that sulfur smell over and over again.
Right.
Do you remember Philip Snyder? Does that name ring a bell?
No, it doesn't.
He was like a whistleblower kind of guy. He had built, he was almost like the foreman, top secret classification all the way up to the highest. Mm-hmm. He helped build underground military bases. And at one point, I think it was I can't remember, it might have been 79. Anyway, at one point, they were building one of the bases, and they kind of fell into something. Apparently, there was already a base there. And when they fell down, himself and some black berets, when they fell down into it, there were these, I think he said tall grays, but then I remember him saying something about reptilians. Mm-hmm. And apparently, they were already there, and he was talking about how we're already at war with these reptilians. The way he described the reptilian is, he said they had these horrible smells. I mean, he said worse than any smell you'd ever smell with the sun baking on it kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And it kind of reminds me of the smell that you're talking about with these guys. Is the smell from the creature? Is the smell from the exhaust fumes? And I'm just curious, because are these kind of related possibly? That's what he was talking about.
It could be.
I might have to check into that. Let me know what you find out.
And Ivan Sanderson was up there.
Because this guy was found dead in his house at one point, where they said he committed suicide.
Who's that?
The Philip Snyder guy. So let me know what you find out about that.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, Ivan Sanderson was up there with Gray Barker and his team of guys, and they were investigating another crash site. Remember when I told you when Levitt was sent to this area looking for what he was told, a downed aircraft?
Yes.
And they didn't find anything. The sheriff was there earlier. It was pretty much a mess in Braxton County. They were chasing all over. What these objects were actually puddle jumping. And they were moving away from Flatwoods. And they were touching down, taking off again, crashing, landing again. So Sanderson was in this one particular area where Levitt was. He was there about a week later with his team, and they found the area where one of these UFOs actually crashed and hit the side of a mountain, and as it came in, it touched down on the ground, and Sanderson and his guys found a whole bunch of these coiled up things that look like, the New Year's party blowers, how they coil?
Yes.
Okay. Yes. They found a bunch of these coiled up pieces strewn all over this crash site, and there were big divots in the ground. Well, to make a long story short, it was brought to a chemical place in West Virginia in the Charleston area, and it was actually like an aragonite, which is like a reptile shell. And Sanderson talks about this. It was basically a shell of a reptile, and except it was gigantic. They had tried opening this coiled up material, and somebody came up with the idea, why don't you just try putting it in water? So what they did is they put it in water and it uncoiled, and it was gigantic. And Sanderson back years ago was talking about, this is what they found here. It was pieces of a reptile. So when you put this stuff together, Snatowski's description of this reptile thing, we have the actual evidence that was tested at the Monsanto Chemical Company, Sanderson's involvement. There was evidence left all over the place in Braxton County that time frame.
Did you get, from all your research, have you gotten the impression that, okay, somebody knows all about all this that is here on this planet, or do you have the impression that this was all new to them, or that
on this particular night?
Well, just, maybe everything, because you've got so much
Well, I know one thing for sure. On this particular night, the government absolutely knew what happened. They knew something went down because they called Colonel Levitt and told him to go up there with troops. They knew something went down, and there was actually 4 damaged objects that came in that night. 3 came over the eastern seaboard, 1 came up from the south, from the Florida direction. So we actually had 4 damaged objects that made repeated landings throughout the United States.
Unbelievable.
And I was able to pinpoint every single one of these locations, and that's what you see on the master map, which, as far as I know, nothing has ever been done in this explicit details like this. And the majority of the information I used, Connie, was right out of the Project Blue Book documents themselves.
What do you think?
Except the government said the explanation of what was seen was actually a meteor. They called it the Washington area meteor, which was seen for 5 to 6 seconds, which is totally absurd.
That would have been a very big meteor, right? It would
yeah,
have
over
also
102 locations, over 21
damage.
hours.
Exactly. We would have been seeing major damage from that. Hey, so, before we go here, let me know, what do you think about disclosure? Will it ever happen? Do you think this might help by having people educated on the Flatwoods Monster and all the other information that you have?
Well, the one thing about the Flatwoods Monster case is it seems every time my research goes into the hands of someone else who is supposedly going to help me from my first book, it was yanked out of the UFO hunters' hands. I did a shoot with the UFO hunters actually a couple years ago, and the show was squashed.
Oh.
Then it went into the hands of Monster Quest, who made it an absolute abortion out of it.
Right.
And so every time my research has gotten to someone's hands who's supposedly going to help me, it turns into a mess. I need people who are willing to take the story and tell it to the public in the right way, tell the truth. And it's kind of interesting, too, Connie, is back in 1952 when Mrs. May was on the television show with Lemon and Stewart. The show was We the People. That was hosted by Dan Seymour. It was about the longest-running radio show from World War II era going into the early 50s. It was put into a television format, and the week after Mrs. May was on television scaring the heck out of the public during you have to remember, 52 had the most sightings of any year. Here comes Mrs. May with a witness, with the reporter vouching for them that this thing happened, and they showed this monster on television, and they scared the American public to death because they were used to these UFO sightings almost on a daily basis through 52. Now, one of them is damaged and crash lands, and this is what comes out of it. So the We the People show was mysteriously canceled.
Oh, wow.
Okay, there was one more episode the week after Mrs. May and the other 2 were on there, and then bang, it was canceled.
Well, let's see how long this show goes.
Monster Quest was canceled shortly after as well.
Wait a minute, maybe we shouldn't be talking right now, Frank. Hold on. Hopefully we won't squash this one. We're with Frank Feschino Jr. right now and talking about the Flatwoods Monster, and we're going to have to say goodbye to you. Can you shoot out all the books that you have real quick so the listeners can know what to check out and buy from you?
Right off of my website, you can get Shoot Them Down, The Flying Saucer Air Wars in 1952, and I have 3 other books that I recently finished, and hopefully we can get them out to the public very soon.
You got it, and hopefully we can hang out with you, go on location with you in this cool little spot that you have, and we'll all be scared out of our minds from what it sounds like from you.
And hopefully we'll come back.
I know it exactly. Or we'll be just another story. Hi, Strangeness. I'm Connie Willis. Thank you very much, Frank. And give us a call whenever you want to, you guys. We'll always talk to you and tell you what's going on. 1-800-STRANGE is the number. Thank you very much. Hey, Frank, that was awesome.
You like it?
Yeah, that was great. You have so much story. I wish I did have a 4-hour show. That'd be fantastic. We could just keep going. Yeah.
Yeah, that was the condensed version.
I know you were condensing
each one of the
it.
chapters in my book to do with Flatwoods, I could talk about for 2 or 3 hours.
Yeah, and I wanted to get out that time was just too much, but I wanted to get out, that